Yes, so ladies and gentlemen, welcome. So now it's we start. So welcome to this panel, which is about from science to impact. And you know, I'm really very glad to have speakers here like Hein Fleuren and also the panelists Dimitri Betsimas and Luc van Wassenhoven. The last two I will introduce later. So we start with half an hour presentation by Hein Fleuren. And then afterwards, the two panelists, Dimitri and Luc, will react on the presentation. And after that, we have 20 minutes left for your questions. And if you don't have questions, then I have some questions prepared. So let me start by introducing Hein Fleuren. And it's really a big pleasure for me and an honor for me to introduce Hein Fleuren. So we know each other already for many years. He started to be my boss in the past. But I think Hein is really one of the top experts in applying optimization in practice. And in fact, I learned it from him. So it's really a pleasure, Hein, an honor to have you here. So Hein Fleuren is professor at Tilburg University, and he's also the scientific director of the Zero Hunger Lab. So the Zero Hunger Lab is like, let's say, analytics for the better world, and then focused on the Zero Hunger SDG, the second one. So Hein, I'm really curious to see what you will present, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Dick. So good afternoon, good morning for some of you, maybe good evening, I saw on the screen already. So what I would like to do is, I would like to tell you from science to impact and about our Zero Hunger Lab. And first of all, I have to make already two disclaimers. From science to impact sounds quite promising. And I'm sure I will not cover a lot of the stuff that is important in the next half hour. But I also learned today, because Dick's title on his badge is also from science to impact. So, but he suggested this title. So now I know why he suggested the title. Today is a kind of special day for me. Because in my area of analytics, there are three people which I admire very much, three researchers, and they are all here today. So first of all, you have Dimitris. He's on screen. And Dimitris is, I think, what I learned from him is he knows a lot about analytics, but so much about analytics, and he sees so many of the interrelations, so that you avoid using only one thing for hammer everything, or for nail everything, or for hammer everything like a nail. That's not from him. Luc is also from the field of analytics, but he has done a lot of work in humanitarian operations. And I think Luc has brought a lot of clarity to the field, and that's what I learned from him. And then there's, of course, Dick, our chairman of today. And Dick already mentioned, we worked a lot together. But the funny thing about Dick is he likes to work on practical problems. And if the math is not there, he simply invents it. And but then there's also in this picture, the three musketeers, they are these three for me. And my role is a little bit closer to the fire. I saw this picture and I thought I use it. Because what I have done in my career is I've worked a lot in practice and at the same time at academia. And the lessons from there, and they are maybe some high-level lessons, but they might be important if you want to do research in this area. What I would like to do this afternoon, I briefly show you how our Zero Hunger Lab is set up. I think later maybe you see why certain things are. In the middle part, I will show you some of the projects, but just a glimpse to give you a kind of idea of what we are doing. And in the final part, I will discuss a little bit what I have found out as very important things if you want to do research with impact. So first of all, this is our team, or at least somewhat more than half of our team. And what we do is we love data science, research, teamwork, and making the world a better place. And we always use the picture of the Yazidi girl. It's a photograph by WFP. And in fact, we cannot help her directly, but with analytics, we can help her indirectly. Now, this started already a long time ago, also with Ortec. Many people from Ortec here today, because we were working for TNT Express at that time. And 10 years ago, we got in contact with the World Food Programme in Rome. And they were questioning whether we could do the same kind of analytics, what we were doing for TNT Express, whether we could do it for WFP. Now, unfortunately, they didn't have money. So in the end, we went further with master thesis students. That's the only thing at that time they wanted to pay. And we started with optimizing the flows of the World Food Programme. So we have really built an end-to-end supply chain model that optimizes the procurement of food, that optimizes, let's say, the transportation routes, the handling cost. And later on, we also added the food basket, because by changing the food basket, you can gain a lot of money. Instead of, let's say, getting Canadian lentils and send them all the way to Africa, you can also use Turkish beans. They have nearly the same nutritional contents, but it's much cheaper to get them to Africa. WFP didn't believe in analytics at all 10 years ago. But a few years ago, this was a statement of Amir Abdullah. And Amir is the Deputy Executive Director of Logistics. And it's his statement, not ours, it's not our calculation. But they said, we have saved so much money by analytics, not only by our tools, but by analytics in general, that we can, with exactly the same budget we have, we can feed 2 million people additionally every year. It's exactly the same budget. And this is, in fact, for me, and also for Dick, we were talking a lot about it at that time. It was for us a kind of proof that science could work, at least. And of course, there's a lot of work behind which is not science. There's a lot of data work, many times as large as the research part. But it was initiated by research. Now, what are we doing? Because this has led to the idea, can't we do more things like this in the world? Not only for the World Food Programme, but there are many other things. So now this is the famous data science picture from Devport. And what we do is we focus on the predictive and prescriptive part, because, and that was also mentioned in one of the other talks, because we think there we can get for NGOs, for the United Nations, we can get the biggest benefit. We combine it with a research question from our partner, and the research question is really central. That's very important for us. And what we hope to achieve is that that the NGO or the UN can, in the end, take better decisions. And we do that on the emergency relief side, and we do it also on the sustainable development side. So both are important, because the final solution to hunger will probably be more on the sustainable development side, and that we keep on bringing food. So how are we organized? So for us in the Zero Hunger Lab, our PhDs are central. And so we have currently nine PhDs, and that's about the limit we want to have, and between around 10. And we have also a kind of supporting master thesis student, bachelor thesis student for part of the work of the PhD, or to find out something within the NGO, an important side path, or maybe a data project. And of course, we need time, we need staff to guide them. And on the other hand, we have the partners with whom we work together. And the idea is that we always couple a PhD with an organization. And of course, depending on the research, it can be multiple organizations. If you are investigating collaboration, and you need to work with several. But in principle, we have a few PhDs at the WFP. We have one at Welthungerhilfe and all these kind of things. Organizations. Of course, we also have our academic partners. And especially we work a lot with Wageningen, but also with the group of Luc at INSEAD. And we have our sponsors. And at this moment, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is a very big sponsor. And they gave us, in fact, the starting budget because they strongly believed in innovation. And they literally said to us, you are not talking about innovation, you are doing innovation. And that was, in fact, the biggest compliment we could get. Let me show you some example projects about what we are doing at the moment. The one on the World Food Programme I won't discuss. Maybe you have read about it a lot of it. But we have also, because we also want to work, let's say, close by. And so we have worked for the food banks, and we have developed an investment model. An investment because during COVID, the food banks in the Netherlands got a large amount of money from the government, and they didn't know how to spend it. So we have done, one of our PhDs has done an extensive research on how to use that money in the best possible way so that we could help as many people as possible. Now, the nice thing is we have both a very nice academic publication, and it has been implemented nearly fully as we have calculated and discussed. And not all the things, but many of the things have been taken into account. I will not discuss all of them because it's not time for it today. But this is just to give you a kind of glimpse. Another one is we are looking into the field of detecting malnutrition. And it is a very important topic in detecting malnutrition in children. I think it was also mentioned earlier, stunting, wasting are very important things. A stunted child almost never recovers, even if you give it good food afterwards. And so what you see on the picture here is how it goes nowadays. And that takes a lot of time and capacity from doctors and nurses. Because all these children need to be measured, they need to be weighed, and all kinds of things need to be calculated. And we are working on an idea, and the idea is in fact from Welthungerhilfe in Germany. They were thinking of making a movie of a child, and by using AI to detect whether the child is malnourished. We are now looking at whether we can even make it simpler by simply taking 1 or 2 photographs of a child. And so far we have been, the first results are there. So we have been successful in estimating the length of a child, which is quite an achievement because you don't know from at which distance the photo is taken and these kind of things. And later on, we want to have the arm circumference and all these kind of things. And then we hope to have with a very good accuracy to predict whether a child is malnourished or not. Then we have also worked on and that's also work which we have partly done together with the group of Luc on the IPC. The IPC is, do you know what the IPC is? Oh, yeah. IPC is a classification of how food insecure people are. We are, I guess most of us are in category 1. And that means we have sufficient food and we can afford it. And it runs all the way to category 5. And that means you need immediately food because you will die within 1 or 2 weeks. And so, and this IPC is in the world of hunger is called the action list of the world. And so the WFP, but also all the big organizations very much depend on it. But it's very difficult to forecast it, to predict it. And now nowadays it's done with questionnaires and people go into the field. But if you ever have looked at the map, at a good map, and see how big Africa is, then you know it's almost undoable if you need to do that twice a year. And then twice a year is in fact not sufficient. So we are looking in all kinds of ways to improve the forecast. So we are also looking now in large language models to use, because when there's hunger, there's probably also some notion of it on Twitter, on Facebook. And by using these large language models, we try to identify whether we can correlate it with the IPC. These kind of things we are doing in detecting malnutrition. A third and a very big one is, this is what we are doing together with WFP and also with Johns Hopkins and Capgemini. Capgemini is the implementation partner. We are looking at healthy diet for healthy people for a healthy planet. And this is really a kind of multi-objective problem where we not only look for the best nutritional diet, but it should also be affordable and it should also be sustainable. Because we really should go to another agricultural system. And there we hope to help with this project. And WFP uses this software to find out for policymakers what kind of diets they can compose in, for example, Nigeria and Indonesia. And the final one is the food system resilience. And so we have looked into data of Solidaridad. They had data of 40,000 smallholder farmers in West Africa. And what we saw is they had a huge difference in productivity. And they wanted to know, and they had a very smart idea, to look at the best farmers in the region, so the best of the 40,000, train them to become a teacher, and then let them train the other ones. And then make a kind of tree. And yeah, you can imagine that within a few steps, you can easily reach 40,000 farmers. And that's what they are implementing and using now. This is a relatively, from an analytics point, a relatively simple thing. Yeah. But it was really nice to see how this works. We are also helping ZOA on their cash programs. How are if you give cash instead of food, how are people using this money? Are they really using it for food? Can you better give it to the woman in the household or to the man? What do you think?
To the woman.
Yeah, that's what we thought as well, but it's not true. It was equal.
Oh, that's good news.
Good news, for us. So, and there's a lot of statistics involved in this because we had a relatively small set, and then you should really, to make accurate and reliable answers, you really need a lot of statistics. So our statistics department was involved in this to get, let's say, the results out. Now, recently we started some new research. I also saw on the 510 slides, the anticipatory action. We are working with World Vision, WFP, and ZOA also on anticipatory action. And the idea of, I don't know whether you know what anticipatory action is that you, in fact, you know that a disaster is coming. You don't know when. It can be a drought, it can be an earthquake, it can be a flood, but that you already prepare. Because it's well known from the literature that if you prepare, the final cost, logistic costs, are much less than when you act when the disaster happens. And we are now looking also with a PhD to just started this research to look into the concepts of anticipatory action. With ZOA, we are also looking at the effects of local climate change. If you look at the main body of literature on climate change, then you see it's on relatively large areas. They are talking about sub-Saharan Africa or countries like Nigeria, but Nigeria is such a big country. A local farmer has nothing to do with these kind of forecasts. He wants to know what is happening on my piece of ground. And so we are now looking whether we can use satellite images together with also with the large language models, whether we can combine them and find out something about the effects, the local effects of climate change. Okay? It's still in its early days, but already very interesting things found. And the final one is we are also looking at the dynamics of a particular conflict. Because so far everybody thought that if we bring food, we also bring peace. but it seems a little bit that it's not completely true. So bringing food already gives a reason for conflict. And because you can fight about the food, you really need to guard it and this kind of thing. And of course, we also do training, not as much and as big as ABW, but we try to train local people also in let's say, all these kind of methods. And final part is, what have I seen? Let's say, from my experience, how to come from science to real impact. There are very many factors. I think you can talk easily an afternoon or a day or maybe a week about it. I will take out a few. And if you want to read more, then there's this paper of Nathan Koens, and Luc also incorporated this, and Maria. And this paper already contains a lot of good things for the humanitarian sector. It's a paper from 2017. And I liked it personally very much, because there's a lot of things in it that are, to my opinion, true. But I will take out a few. I think it's very important for researchers, if you start in this area, and that's also for the ABW topics, you need to understand the context. And you really need to talk and to invest a lot of time in talking to the organization. For example, when I started modeling for the WFP, the first thing that the logistic manager said, Hein, this is really nice that you are going to model from behind your desk, but first I'm going to send you to South Sudan. And that's what he did. So I've been quite a while in South Sudan, and to see how the operation works. And then you see, and then you really learn from the people on the ground what's happening. And for example, one of the things is tribes. And so you can make a kind of allocation model, but if the allocation model crosses the borders of the tribes, it's simply not going to work. These kind of things you need to take into account. People are easily saying, yeah, we are going to do more agriculture. Have you ever looked at Africa? A large part of Africa looks like this. And as a modeler, we easily talk about the distance matrix, Ij, or a time matrix, Tij. But have you ever looked at the roads? And these roads are completely disappeared after 2 months, 2 months of rain, because we have the seasons there. And so this whole context you really need to understand before you start modeling and trying to impose a solution. Another one is and this was also mentioned in the paper. There's very often a very poor problem definition, and you should really be aware of, for the researchers among us, it's not your specialization that matters. Of course, it's very nice to be good in machine learning or in operations research or in statistics. But in the end, it's about a goal that, let's say, the organization wants to achieve. And therefore, I really would advise all the researchers here, please don't start teaching if you are at an organization, whether in a commercial setting. I've seen it so often that a researcher starts to tell about his latest research or his top publications. But that's not what these people are aiming at, what they are interested in. They believe that you are an expert, and you don't need to explain that to them. And so it's better, and that's the next one, to listen as a researcher. It seems a very open door, but I've seen this so often go wrong. With young consultants the same. And so please listen to what these people have to tell. And I think we should also be open on each other's objectives. If you start as a researcher, or in the case of ABW as ORCHEC, and you start to work with an organization, be very clear on what you want to achieve. And because the goal of a researcher is different than the goal of a manager of an NGO. It's simply true, but acknowledge it, and don't turn around it and I think and I found also that with good communication you simply can reach the same goal. And so the researcher can make his publication, but still you can have impact on the question that's on the mind of senior management or organization. And another one, really take care of the difference in perception. If you only talk to senior management, I'm going already to disclose that it will become very difficult. Because let's say the notion on the shop floor might be completely different. Senior management thinks they have a planning problem. But on the shop floor, they know they have a raw materials or a resources problem. And therefore, I think, and that's what I always do. I start, of course, to talk with senior management. They are often the ones who invite you. But I always ask permission to talk to the shop floor and also to middle management, because everybody might have his own view on the topic you want to solve. And I've seen very often that these views are completely different. And then there's one on validation. We like the model and we are trying our first results. We have the first numbers, but it's really important to discuss these numbers extensively with the organization, because the main numbers, they might seem very, very okay. You think, hey, my model is doing well. But what happens if you look into the details? Because there are a lot of effects that might compensate each other, which give a reasonably good number, but the underlying numbers might be completely wrong. So, for example, transport costs are way too high, and stock costs are way too low. On average, it turns out to be well, the total logistic cost. And, in that way, and really take the time for this. And this also requires something of the NGO, because they also have to validate the numbers. Are the right numbers used? What can we do with it? Can this be true? And sometimes they often have to make a kind of calculation themselves with their own numbers. Could this be true? Your optimal solution, and then calculate. And then you often find the so-called hidden constraints. You have not thought, or they have not mentioned a particular constraint. And in this way, you work in a kind of circular way. One of the last ones is define good KPIs. And this is a real example of the KPIs which we discussed with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And they said, we want you to achieve this. And you see, research papers is only one of the 10. Because they are interested in much. And if I would make this with WFP or with Oxfam Novib, it would look completely different. But try to make and try to define the good KPIs, try to define the kind of base case and work from there on. And then you start to talk the same language. And last but not least, for real impact, it's important that you build long-term relationships. It was just discussed above in the other session. Start to build long, and that's why we, in working with NGOs and UN, we don't work with master thesis students in the beginning. Now, maybe to find out certain things, but preferably we work with a PhD, because the PhD is there for 4 years. Sometimes a little bit longer. Sometimes a PhD wants to have a kind of educational contract, and until work you can then be there for 5 years. And that gives a kind of continuity with the organization, and then you start to learn. And we also ask our PhDs to join the meetings of these organizations, because then you hear a lot. You hear a lot of things that are happening. But also important here is look multidisciplinary. I learned so much from social researchers. from humanities researchers, from law researchers, because they have a completely different look at things. And myself, with this your limited data science look, it really helps if you get, let's say, this more broader, this broader view. And as a researcher, and I think ABW has done this terrifically, look for an implementation part. Because if we have done a study, for example, we have done a study in Nigeria, Burundi, and Sudan, and no, that was a nice study, but then the study got a lot of attention, and then people call me, hey, can you also do it for Burkina Faso? Can you do it for Tanzania, for Kenya? But yeah, most of the researchers are not interested anymore. And then it is very helpful if you have a kind of implementation part. And I think ABW has done that, has found that perfectly in Ortec, to work out all these things. So that's in a nutshell. I don't know how we did this time, Dick.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Hein. It was really very interesting. Thanks. So now I would like to invite, let's start in alphabetical order with Dimitri Betsimas to give a reaction on that. So Dimitri is also a Science to Impact Director of ABW. We're working together a lot. And Dimitri is also doing a lot of projects in the spirit of analytics for a better world. And he's well known in the world. So Dimitri, could you give your reaction on Hein's presentation?
Of course, thank you, Dick. Not surprisingly, I agree on more or less everything that we have heard. I would like to emphasize some elements from my experience, which are consistent with Hein, but mine's are in some different direction. So just so that people understand where I'm coming from, I have been an academic all my life, roughly, been in MIT faculty about 35 years, and but my comments are really based on my experience of applying our field of analytics in the world, primarily through companies I have started. I would start, I have really four main points. The first main point is the role of universities. This is something I have spent, all of us, all four of us, Dick, Luc, and Hein, are professors, myself too. So what we do is, from the point of view, our principal occupation is a university environment where we teach students and so forth. So in that capacity, I have found that over the years, when I started my career, when I was a younger fellow, my impact in the world has been lower. And over time, it has increased. And I always wondered why. Here's the first aspect of it. That in my opinion, universities are strong in creating prototypes. They are not strong in even solving the problem correctly, but they are not strong in implementation, follow through, an operational aspect, and so forth. So the way I have organized, and it seems similar with what we have heard, is that I engage my students early in their research on designing a solution method. But at the same time, I have, or soon thereafter, I have software engineers, people who will take it, sometimes from the organization, sometimes from a company companies I have created, to make certain that this continues, is implemented, and so forth. You might have a fantastic algorithmic solution, but if it's not simple, understandable, implemented in software, chances are it might not find itself in practice. So from science to impact, I would like to emphasize utilizing the university resources in the right way, prototype building, and utilizing company resources or private company or ABW for that matter, in implementation. Number two, engaging humans. And Heinz has spoken extensively about that. My experience has been, and that's actually one of the reasons I have started to have more impact later in my career than earlier, is that it's not enough just to listen to them. Of course, it's critical to listen, and academics sometimes, myself included, are not as strong in listening. But even assuming you listen, I think this is the second step. Namely, that in a project that I have done about human health in various hospitals, I have weekly meetings with the people there, and slowly the people become owners of the ideas, not just users, owners. And if somebody is an owner, it will go the extra miles in defending it, improving it, and so forth. I can talk in detail about how important it is, but my experience has been that's a crucial piece. To be honest, early in my career, I found this to be missing. We're in the ivory of academia. We had interesting ideas and so forth. Even if we implement it, you need people who are champions, who basically guide the research in the right way so that it solves the right problem. Heinz mentioned many things, but I would like to reemphasize. It's not as opposed to, it's perhaps an enhancement. Number three, science to impact is educating on the art of the feasible. So education, I'll give you an example. One of my most successful collaborations is a hospital system in Connecticut, the largest Hartford hospital system. It's about 2,500 beds, 30,000 people. It's a large system. So I have given, in addition to being engaged in various projects, I have made an effort to educate the middle to senior management, as well as physicians, nurses, and administrators on the art of the feasible. What is it that analytics can do? And this opens the door for a stronger relation. I have found this to be the case in whenever I have a long-term relation, educating the people is first of all good for them, but it's also good for penetrating and doing, again, bringing support and effort on that. And final, and I think also Hein mentioned about it, building a broader coalition that involves both the senior management as well as the people you are talking to. Because if there is a mismatch, it can easily kill a project. But if there is consistency, reinforcement is relevant. So I think in that aspect, the human connection, the relations are material. So I would say, in summary, doing good work is, of course, important. I'm not suggesting. But in my experience, it's unfortunately neither necessary, definitely not sufficient. Other elements like the human connection, broader coalition, end-to-end software for implementation, especially early on, are critical. As I mentioned, my views are quite consistent with what we have heard. I just want to emphasize it in my own way from my own experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. And then the second panel member, Luc van Wassenhoven, well known in the field of humanitarian logistics. Hein already mentioned one of his papers. Luc is from INSEAD. So Luc, we are really curious to see your reaction on Hein's presentation.
Well, good day, everybody. Hank, congratulations on Zero Hunger Lab and an excellent presentation. I know you were D'Artagnan, but I wasn't quite clear on who I was on this slide. Was I Athos or Porthos or Aramis? Any case, one for all for one is what they used to say, right? So let me make a few comments. First of all, if this is a panel, we should not all agree with one another because that makes it, boring panel. But it's difficult, as Dimitris also said, to disagree with a lot of the things that you said because, we all have similar ideas and similar careers. But anyways, going from science to impact is a century-old question, right? It's particularly important for applied sciences and, engineering, and operations research and operations management are obviously part of that. So we should be problem-driven. You have been talking about that a little bit. My advisor at the time, Marshall Fisher, when I asked him what's a good paper, used to say a good question, well researched. Now, analytics is, of course, an interesting high potential methodology, but it's nothing if you don't have a good question. And, the answer to that question should have clear practical implications. Now, these could be insights. You could actually sharpen intuition and improve understanding, but they could also be practical, heuristics, recommendations. And then, of course, you need to go further and implement them. And then go into what you and Dimitris said in terms of working with organizations. But to me, the key is still asking the right question, right? And this is not necessarily what we teach our students today. We tend to give our students nicely defined problems. And we teach them, how to apply the solution methodology. And we don't give them messy problems and ask them to come up with, what is a good question in there and how would you be able to answer it? And so I think perhaps if we want to have more impact, this is one way to go. And I also believe that it is the basis of good work and certainly also, data analytics. And maybe, data analytics can help us come up with the right question. The second point, is a bit related to that. You can question the role of academics, and we should do so. To me, academics is very much about doing good research and good teaching, and hopefully around topics that have a positive impact on society or the environment. If we produce excellent graduates, they can be hired by humanitarian organizations, right? And they can also, strongly impact helping with practical applications. And this is what is happening today, right? I mean, your students, Hein, are joining WFP and creating, started with small expert groups, but now larger departments within WFP and also in other organizations that actually implement the stuff that we're teaching them. So this is great. I was thinking specifically about Koen Peters and so on in WFP. So this is the second point. The third point I think that is extremely important is, we need to be very careful about values in academia. It is extremely important in my mind, especially in today's world, to try to be honest, generous, and ethical in what we do as researchers and teachers. So we need to do responsible research on topics that indeed can have a positive impact on society or the environment. That's true for analytics, data analytics, but it's true for engineering and applied research in general. Right, so I don't necessarily believe that every one of us in academia should be involved in, practical applications or practical problems, although I am in a large way. I think what Dimitris said is very, very good. And, you tend to start your career as a more academic, theoretical, methodological person, and then move into how can I get this thing to work in practice as you get older. And that's, I think, is great. So let me summarize 3 points on practical impact. There's still a need to focus on the right question. Certainly not, I have a hammer and everything looks like a nail now, as Hank said. We need to do this, very responsible research and impact our students by giving the example. And then, I still believe that impact on practice can be direct or very indirect via our graduates and our, students that we train. So let me stop there. I'll be happy to talk more. You have to stop me, otherwise I'll talk about this until tomorrow.
Thanks a lot, Luc. Many thanks. Okay, so now we have some time, although maybe not 20 minutes for questions from the audience. It's a little bit pity that I don't see the questions on the internet. Is there maybe somebody who can? Okay, then I already said you were the first. Then yeah.
Thanks. So in my work, I often try to translate research into decisions for philanthropists. And I get very tempted to say, we need more research to make this better decision. Do you recognize that? And how do you go about this?
Hein.
I do recognize it. And I think in most cases where I have been, it is true. Because when you look specifically to the field of analytics and engineering, I think NGOs, they can do a lot compared to the industry. But the industry 20 years ago didn't have that many data scientists as they have now. And I think the NGOs and the UN are a little bit lagging behind, but it will come. So I think your feeling is right. Yeah.
So just go ahead and recommend more research.
I for the time being, maybe not until infinity, but yeah.
Yeah. So Dimitri, I see that you want to react.
Yeah, I would like to add the lesson that I have learned, and I think Dick, you have experienced this. That I say that often perfection is outside the human condition. What I mean by that, and this is relevant to what the lady asked, is that of course research is needed. But it's related to the comment of not at infinity. I believe if you try to solve a problem in a perfect way, you might actually not succeed in implementation because it might take too long. You might take a wrong view. And this is true in life as well. In academia, there's no perfect paper. You submit a paper that you think is perfect, and then the referees, the reviewers destroy it. So I would say in moderation. Yes, research is of course very relevant, but in moderation, not at infinity, as I mentioned. And I would stop far before infinity.
Okay, thanks.
Do you mind if I react to that?
Of course, Luc. Yes, please.
So I usually make a comparison between humanitarian organizations I work with and academics. And I talk about fireflies and elephants. Fireflies live one day, elephants live 100 years. And you can guess who the academics are in that comparison. So you need to find a way to bridge that gap or, bring them together. And we wrote a paper, Charles Colbert, who was a student of mine at the time, 30 years ago, that we published in Operations Research that was called The Natural Drift. And what we meant by that is, on the one hand, you have pretty theoretical work, and on the other hand, you have needs in practice. And there needs to be somebody in the middle that translates the two. And we used to call them management engineers. I think our consulting friends would call them boundary spanners this day. Doesn't matter. I think what Hein is doing with Zero Hunger Lab is a perfect example of being, a management engineer or boundary spanner, to make sure that the science from the research is actually translated and implemented, or at least facilitated. So that would be my reaction on that.
Thanks a lot.
I have a question to Pieter Rammers is my name. It was very interesting. Thank you for your presentation. And today I heard many use cases, very nice business cases being implemented to make the world a bit better. And I was wondering, I heard about this thing from bringing things into practice, from research into practice. But is that the most complex challenge, or are there other challenges that are even bigger that you encounter doing these things?
Very good question. I always say to my students and PhDs, the real work starts after you have done your analysis. And so for my point of view, let's say the whole change management cycle, which starts as supposed with analytics, we come with a better decision or a better solution. And that might be a software tool which you are into, or it might be simply an advice. But the whole implementation of that often takes much more time, and in my opinion, is much more difficult than the scientific analytical side of the things.
Now I'm just curious, being part of a data and analytics company, because we always see problems in getting the data right, getting the data there. But I don't hear anything about that. Is that not an issue?
It is a big issue, but it would be a complete presentation in itself. Because there are so many things to say about the data. And I've heard in the other presentations, there were things said about the data. So I think I won't touch upon that, but that's indeed one of the huge things, especially in a humanitarian context, because data is scarce, it's very uncertain.
Quality,
it's sparse,
the governance.
the quality is,
But Hein, does implementation not already start at the beginning of the project and not afterwards?
in fact it is. And I have what was being said, if you ask the right questions and from the beginning it's clear what you want to achieve, then you do already a large part of the work. Not all the work, but a large part.
I don't know if Dimitri or Luc wanted to react on that. Dimitri,
I have a small comment, if that's okay.
of course, yeah.
So, so I wrote a book, Data, Models, and Decisions. When I wrote it, I had black hair. I thought data was maybe 30–40%. My experience, the data business is 80 to 90%. That is definitely of the time. Both data to start the project, but also data produced to implement it and so forth. So in academia, we spent, and I'm a primary example, I spent as a professor, we spend really little time on data, but we spend most of our time in algorithmic development, creative ideas, and so forth. As the gentleman who asked the question, I believe that data is critical. And my experience in when I have been more successful than not is to engage appropriate people, not so much students, because it's very hard for them to manage, especially gigantic data sets, and data engineers, software engineers early on to facilitate this process. So the 80–90% is important.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Luc, please.
In the humanitarian world, my experience is that people are so much solicited, to enter reports and do audits and so on. They have better things to do than give you data. So I very much agree with what Dimitri said earlier. We need to engage the people and make them become owners so that they see that when they collect the data, which they can, if they're in the field, they know their business. They have an incentive to do so, and we can show that indeed that helps them do their jobs better, whether it's efficiency or speed or effectiveness.
Dimitri, yeah.
I would like to add something that happened yesterday that impressed me. So I worked with the emergency department in one of the hospitals I work, and I work with nurses. This is people who spend their lives caring for patients. And we build a software. The details are not important, but we build an analytic software with data and so forth. And yesterday was a presentation to the senior leadership of the hospital. They invited me, but they made the presentation. I said almost nothing, and it was a fantastic presentation. I was extremely proud of because they were real owners on that. They knew exactly what to say, what not to say. It was far better if I, as the sort of the person who developed the algorithms, spoke. It is, we now have, I already received messages from other hospitals that were present that they would like to do it and so forth. So the ownership aspect is relevant, and the belief. I take it to follow up on what Luc said. That's why I mentioned it.
Thanks. More questions So maybe also from online people, or
Not so far.
not so far? Okay,
Well,
okay.
I have
Yeah.
a question that follows up to the previous one in terms of,
Okay, and then I come to you.
in terms of, not going to infinity in terms of the research, right? But I'm curious if there are any heuristics or any kind of methods that you use to say, what, here's enough, let's go to the implementation. Or is that really not your decision from an academic perspective, and it's really on the, let's say, the experts that you ask them for the input to make that decision. So I'm curious on that dynamic. Is it standardized, or is it really tailored to every situation?
In my case, it is tailored, but and that's I think Dimitris also mentioned it. You should be careful in not giving a very complex thing to an organization which is not used to data analytics at all. So in my opinion, you should grow with the organization, and then that also has to do with the ownership, because the organization should, and the people working with it should take the ownership. So what I often do is I simply start, let's say, with, along the data maturity curve, first give them a kind of system where data is, and that they can look at the data, view the data in, let's say, in graphs and on maps, and from there on. Then what you often see, and that has to do with what Dimitris mentioned, then they start to take the ownership, because then they come to me and say, hey, Hein, but if I see this now, but can you add a kind of functionality to, and then often you hear an optimization question. You hear a kind of allocation question or whatever, an optimization question. And so I would steadily go there. But for example, to give you the example of the World Food Programme, Dick and I, we have thought a lot about robust optimization to use it, because we think it's very logical for them, but they haven't taken the step. So they stick to linear programming because they say at this moment, it's more than sufficient what they can handle. And maybe in the future, we are going to robust optimization, but not now. And we first want to take this on and make it work.
Great. Some reactions from Luc or Dimitri.
So one comment I have two comments really. So my experience has been that it's better to start in socializing a prototype that has more limits in its capabilities. A concrete example, we have created a system that predicts length of stay and mortality in hospitals. Our initial accuracies, let's call it, was 75%. And then the doctors will start socializing, the doctors, the nurses start participating. And based on their comments, we improved the 0.75 to 0.85, just on their participation. This achieved two things. First of all, it improved the algorithm drastically. They also feel, again, owners. So now, if somebody asks them, another colleague asks them, I don't answer, they answer. That's the first aspect. The second is my students try to impress me with complicated solutions. No, I'm not impressed with that. I'm impressed with simple solutions. So especially because a very complicated solution that is very hard to explain has a lower chance of being applied in practice. So there's a trade-off between complexity and simplicity. I mean, clearly some problems require a more sophisticated approach, but the simpler the approach is, my view is, the easier it is to be absorbed and communicated.
Yeah, I think we don't necessarily train our students very well and explain clearly without Greek letters. Right? A friend of mine.
Not the problem for me, Luke.
Pardon me?
Not the problem for me.
I know. A good friend of mine always used to say, explain it to grandma. And I think it's silly, but it's a good way of putting things. Because if you can't, grandma is probably not an expert in data analytics or the stuff we talk about, but if you're not capable of explaining it in normal terms in a couple of minutes so that people can understand it and buy into it, then you're probably, not okay. So that's an important thing. Perhaps we should try to also train our students to do that much better than we typically do, to make the connection between, say, academia and practice.
Thanks.
We call those storytellers.
Storytellers, yeah.
Is that the term you use as well?
Yeah. Last question, I think, because the time is over. Yeah, it's possible.
One online question. Or
Oh,
two.
yeah, but I think I already promised her.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
So basically you mentioned that you get, when you're doing a project, that you get input from the senior management, the middle management, and the people on the floor. And that you get very different input from each, I guess, category. So I can imagine that this happens pretty much in every project, because that's just always people kind of who are very overseeing things are kind of disconnected from what's actually happening on the floor. And that happens a lot in public health. So I'm wondering how do you consolidate these different inputs? Because I suppose you have to supposedly try to please everyone, but it can be very difficult.
And sometimes it's simply impossible. But what I try to look at the different views, I'm first going to research them. Could they be true? And then you find out that maybe the view of middle management is the best, or the shop floor is the best, but sometimes senior management is the best. And then you take that as the main starting point and try to include the other ones. At least that's the way how I do it. Or it might be the shop floor who is right. There might, for example, be a resource problem. Now that's relatively easy to investigate whether there's a resource problem. And then I simply go back to management and say, hey, you thought it was this, but and that's part of being transparent and open. And I also see that as my function and role as researcher.
Thanks. Yeah, some reactions from Luc or Dimitri?
So my reaction would be that from the area I know the best, which is humanitarian operations, there's a huge gap between people in the field and people at headquarters. So if you do a project, you need to understand that and try to bridge that gap. People in the field really know what the issues are. But very often the organization, the way it is structured, you know, the audits, the donors, put so many constraints on the people that they really cannot find a good simple solution. And this is where I think I agree with Hein, that you need to be able to communicate things to the different levels in the organization. And sometimes the problem is with headquarters, sometimes the problem, of course, is in the field. But there is a big divide there still.
Thanks.
Just a small comment is I view one of my roles is to bridge these gaps of understanding. I trust far more the people who actually have the problem in front of them, like what Luc said. I mean, because they know it's not a theoretical story, they have to deal with that. But on the other hand, I feel one of my roles is to be an ambassador of clarification in both ends, and often a third party, a party who is not ingrained in the organization, my experience is helps clarify, and it has to be done politically correctly. I mean, not insulting people, but my experience is that's a good role to play for us.
Thanks. Okay, so as I look at the time, I think we have to stop here. So, Hein, Luc, and Dimitri, many thanks for your inspiring contribution. So,
thank you for having us.
And so I think I'm looking at Robert. So the next item on the agenda starts now, or
Now,
yeah, perfect. Yeah, sorry,
we have some time to relax before the people from upstairs come down. Because
Okay.
we want to close it all together. They are also in the last question. So let me grab my slides and perfect.
Yeah.
10-year monthly.